across the chessboards. I'm talking about climate change, whose latest United Nations Framework Conference just ended in the Azerbaijani capital of Baku this week. Global leaders once more renewed their commitment to tackle it across the chessboards too. So, just how much is needed to cap the financing of climate change, especially in Africa when it comes to adaptation policy? My guest today is somebody with a respectable knowledge on environmental issues over the years. He is the current board chair of the Cameroon Development Corporation, the second largest employer after the state, and a key element in agriculture, where one of the discussions concerning the climate change discourse is taking place. And previously, he served at the international level on several different platforms, including the World Alliance of Cocoa Producers. Hope Sonaibai, welcome to Globewatch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ebony. Thank you.
COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, was simply on financing. Why such a focus? There was not much talking on 1.5 degrees Celsius. Right. The temperature debate was kept aside.
Mm-hmm. Well, to tell you the truth, I didn't attend COP29 because I thought it was going to be another meeting to decide when next to meet. But, interestingly, some major decisions were made concerning financing, as you mentioned, concerning other issues of standards. Standards affect the marketing and affect the finance. Article 6, which is the key to financing for climate change, was further developed. So it's ending up to be, a monumental conference. I think the elephant in the room remains the reactions of the incoming United States government with President Trump on what they would do on their climate change, commitments. But that really didn't seem to affect the mode or the mood of the conference so far. Financing, as you know, is a key element, especially for developing countries. And financing means developing a market in which we have confidence to trade, like in other commodities. These markets require standards. For the environment and for carbon, there are two main standards, the gold standards and the VERA standards. So everybody needs to be on the same page. When I talk about cocoa and I say grade 1, I know what it means. The market knows what it means. But what does VERA standard mean, especially for producing countries? So these standards were developed, elucidated, agreed upon, and I'm really surprised because when you come to standards, it's something that's being dealt with civil society, NGOs, and it takes a lot of debate. But I think we have, agreement on that.
You have attended not a small number of United Nations framework conferences on climate change. The whole debate on financing emerged from Copenhagen, principally in 2009, with a yearly global commitment of roughly $100 billion that was renewed in 2015 during the landmark Paris climate change deal and renewed in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, or in Glasgow in the United Kingdom, or in Dubai, and the list can go on. That 100 billion threshold yearly amount has not been met, but some reports say that last year climate financing reached $1.2 trillion. The target for 2030 for the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations is spending roughly $6 trillion. Why are we unable to meet those targets that we meet at the level of financing?
The market is new for everybody. And I'll just add on the side that developing countries need to stop crying about developing countries meeting their commitments.
Developed countries meeting their commitments.
Yeah, developed countries. And concentrate on building capacity and knowledge on climate. And, adaptation, resilience, all those other aspects. Henry Paulson, the former United States Secretary of the Treasury, said last month that
former U.S. Finance Minister in simple
right, that we need $120 trillion to refinance industry for us to meet our global climate change commitments. Okay? The currency for the calculation is a US dollar. But the currency that is going to finance this re-engineering of the industry, so to speak, is carbon. So if we don't learn about the carbon currency, the train would have left the station without us.
And how do we just unpack the carbon debate in the market today where the need to trade? There is too much talk about the carbon market today.
Well, what we need to do, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, was that when we talk about the national determined commitments, okay, or contributions, NDCs, we need to link that up with carbon credits. Now, the operational article is Article 6, 6.2, 6.4, 6.8, which were largely developed in this. What does that mean? It means in the Article 6, we talk about authorization for use. So a sovereign government gives authorization to a third party to trade its carbon. For example, if an investor comes into Cameroon that has declared they have 12 million hectares of forests that have been degraded, right? And an investor says, okay, I need 40,000 hectares to rehabilitate, in which I have 20,000 hectares of new plantings to do. He gets that block from the Minister of Forestry under the supervision of the Minister of Environment, like is a case in Cameroon. He plants native trees in 20,000 hectares. Each tree has a carbon sequestration curve, and you can monitor those trees over time and say, okay, in 20 years, I will yield so much carbon. And then you agree with the government.
Principally what Saudi Arabia is doing today with the Green Tree Initiative.
Exactly. And then you say, okay, if I'm going to produce 10 tons or 10 megatons of carbon, what is that selling on the market? Yesterday, the market was $100 a ton, right? So you do that calculation, and you say, okay, this part will go to the government, this part will go to the local communities, and the investor gets the money he put in.
The leader in the global advocacy for financing on climate change issue is, of course, the Green Fund, which for over 15 years now of its existence has injected roughly $16.1 billion to sponsor roughly 288 green projects worldwide to combat climate change. Weeks ago, the co-chair, the new one, Seni Nafo of Malian nationality, was my guest here, and he was talking about all these issues. When you look at the way we spend money today on climate change, do you think we invest wisely?
Generally, no, because we have to build capacity on the whole climate issue. I would like to see in this country a team of experts under the supervision, maybe, of the head of government, like action people, where if an investor comes in, those are the people who sit and listen to the technology and the possibilities and advise government. We need to work on that. We need to make sure that we have the proper lead institution when it comes to carbon. Right now, the lead for carbon policy is the Ministry of Environment. Perfect. But when it comes to finance futures on carbon, derivatives on carbon, it has to be, in my opinion, the Minister of Finance. So there are mechanisms to work that we need to put in place before we start.
They need to be synchronized.
Yes. We need to say, for carbon, this is the lead, and these are the sectorial people that go, along with it. So the second aspect is that we in Cameroon, we belong to the Congo River Basin Forest Area, which is the only area in the world today that has been demonstrated to reduce the carbon dioxide in the environment. The Amazon is saturated because of forest fires and other interventions. So that gives us...
Especially in the Bolsonaro years as president.
Exactly, where the President Biden was, in Manaus, part of the Amazon last week, providing more funding for G20 and other environmental, measures. But, the concept of getting ready, to obtain financing has been, a major issue. The second issue is the issue of the debt burden of the country.
Okay.
For example, you look at RDC. I've done quite a bit of work, for the government of RDC. Actually, the
Democratic Republic of Congo.
The last COP meeting in Dubai, I went as an advisor to the government of RDC. They cannot qualify for debt stress, so they cannot qualify for some of the green funds that the World Bank is either making available or other development funds.
By the way, there is no country from the Congo Basin area which is qualified for the green fund, access to financing of the green fund.
Yeah, we are because our debt stress is only about 40%, right? So we can get cheap money, call it that, excuse the expression, 2 to 5%, either directly from the World Bank or guaranteed by the World Bank, and use that money to invest in our climate change, aspect, procedures, resilience, all that.
A moment ago, you talked about adaptation and that African countries or developing countries generally should stop crying all the time for developed countries to meet their financial engagements. We'll get into that. But first, let us talk a context situation. Right. The COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, was holding within a well-defined context. Right. The Green Initiative of the European Union for sustainable agricultural practices to help finance climate change had a new leadership command, especially with new elections in the European Union Parliament that shaped the way that might work. Just a few days to that, to COP29, there was a new U.S. administration which brought sharp memories of what happened 8 years ago. Right. Trump taking the U.S. out of the numerous climate-leading initiatives.
Engagements,
When you have that kind of global mindset, which is there today, you simply say that we are in more trouble again, right?
It looks
the second Trump administration will be nicer to the climate debate.
It looks troublesome, but until he unfolds his policy in January, it's difficult to say. But thank goodness we don't have to convince anybody that climate change is a reality. It's just that some people can handle the effects of climate change better than others. Those that are financially stronger, those that are more developed. Look at what happens in Europe. Look at what happened in Spain a couple of weeks ago. Flooding, and Spanish government comes in, European Union comes in. You see, you have mudslides in the West, in Chang. We are struggling, And the other day I was thinking, going up to Boya, for example, I said, between Mutengene and the next village, that big rock, what happens? There's heavy rain. There is subsistence agriculture, scratching on the soil, which makes it more ready for water to percolate. What if that slides down to the road? What are the alternatives to get to Boya Tukumba? Those are the things we need to look about. 2 months ago, I wrote an article on climate change implications for Limbe. If you go to Limbe today and you want to know the number of hills in Limbe, you have to count them every day. Because of the excavation, because of the seawall, they are moving to Douala for other road projects. What does that do? So the fact, we don't need to convince anybody of the realities. Now we need to take action. And we need to learn that there are two things in the environmental issue. There's CO2, another greenhouse gas emission reduction. but there's also carbon dioxide removals, which are just as important. Because if we don't remove the carbon dioxide in the air, we have this thing blocking us, raising the temperature. You mentioned 1.5, that we're not going to be close. So you can get carbon credit removals, that countries can use and sell and develop their resilience. That's the
You talked
flux.
of action time. One of the ways to take action is adaptation.
Right.
This is a core element for African governments, adaptation, adaptation, adaptation. How do we adapt?
Well, first of all, we put in policies to recognize the fact that we have a problem, and there's enough expertise in the world, at least it's growing, on adaptation mechanisms that can be employed at different country levels. And then we look for financing, how we finance this. Actually, we can become a trader of carbon and make millions of dollars from it. If I owe Japan 6 million, as Cameroon, and Japan has commitments to draw down its carbon emissions or CO2.
If you don't draw the CO2, I don't pay back your money.
No,
Something of that nature.
something
right?
of that kind of a swap.
Yeah.
Or I can grow the trees to sequester the carbon, and once that goes through the standard boards, Cameroon can give you a certificate that this I did for Japan, and Japan can count that for its NDCs.
Yes.
So we can get to a situation of debt for nature swaps. President Biden mentioned it in the conference. So that's why I think that in Cameroon, the leadership for the mechanics of financing has to be the Minister of Finance.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are very much involved in the climate discourse over the years. You just talked of the national determined contributions. This is a question possibly for policy thinkers like you. You said we should stop asking money, money, money. We should be adapting to solutions that are ready to help stabilize the climate debate in Africa.
And within our reach.
Within our reach.
Yeah.
If you had to give two solutions, what will you provide?
First, I'll get a credible lead institution in the country. Second, I'll build a team of experts in the various, send them to school, to learn different aspects of climate trade, and let this team be the advisors, to government. I remember when I was a young cadre in marketing board in those days, my general manager, who is still alive today, sent us out for training. I went to school in Israel. My friends went to the London Board of Trade to learn how the mechanics. So when investors came, the GM sat, the team, we had a committee d'experts. And
A committee of experts.
yes, and we'll advise him on the various aspects.
think tank.
Yeah, a think tank. That's what we need in Cameroon. That is not dependent on one particular ministry, you see.
A portion of your life too has been spent in areas which are simply considered as portions where the climate change is being accelerated. You worked in the cocoa industry for so many years. In the cocoa industry, they destroyed the forest to plant the cocoa trees. At times, they cannot sustain over the years. You are in agriculture today, the board chair of the Cameroon Development Corporation, CDC. These are all areas where the natural forest is destroyed. Somebody may say that people like you, when they talk the opposite of their actions. Is that correct?
Well, the actions were there before I was born, so we know the managers. But we've always known that I always like to narrow things down to Cameroon. Cameroon, massive deforestation for cocoa has never been our model. Like in Malaysia. Malaysia adopted an open sun cocoa growing policy, and that moved them to third producer in the world in record time. But the exposing of the cocoa tree to the sunlight had its effects. After a while, production goes down. So in Cameroon, our agronomists, our specialists have always said, You fell a certain number of trees to provide permanent shade, and you grow the cocoa under, because cocoa is an understory crop, you know. So that's been our policy. Now, because of climate change, because of permanent trees are not studied as much as the cocoa tree itself, we have not been able to institute policy. We've said, okay, when you do a hectare, make sure you have 11 to 13 big trees and you plant your cocoa, you know. In plantation agriculture, it's a completely different thing. It's something that was done in the colonial era. A lot of land was used. Now we're trying to see if things like rubber, if things like oil palm can qualify for some kind of carbon sequestration credits. That's what we're working on. So,
the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals calls for inter alia sustainable agriculture, which means an agriculture which respects the natural environment.
Right.
Do you apply it at the level of the CDC today when it comes to management? Oh, the operational management is led by the Director General, but as chair of the board, do you give some kind of policy guidelines in that direction?
I think so. We are getting there for two reasons. Number one, because of the available technology we have today, we believe that you don't need the same surface area to produce as much or even more than you were producing in the past.
Leapfrogging.
You can leapfrog, yes. You have tissue culture mechanisms to produce trees that are more productive. So you can reduce the area that you're planting, especially when you're doing your rehabilitation or you replant. And mentioning CDC, that is what our recommendation as a board is, to gain some area in which we can do short cycle crops to increase our revenue, to also assist government in the import substitution.
One last question. It's practically difficult to meet you today without talking cocoa. Right. I was at the opening session of Parliament and I heard the House Speaker hailing the Minister of Commerce or Trade for the quality and the amount of money that Cameroonian cocoa gets in the market today, blah, 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 and whatsoever. Mm-hmm. What accounts for this surge, 5,000, 6,000? In those days when you were there, the price was not all that exorbitant.
No, it wasn't. I think we really need to be careful when we examine the phenomenon that's going on now.
Okay.
Number one, we cannot allow ourselves to say that the head of state has given farmers 5,000 to 6,000 francs a kilo, because the way the market works, the day it will fall to 1,000, the farmers will say will be punished by the head of state. So that link, I don't think, is healthy, because I think we've removed government from the cocoa sector in 1989, 90, during the restructuring.
Privatization.
Right, liberalization. Before then, my job as Director of Stabilization was to take to the presidency and say, my colleague of sales has sold this much on futures. These are the differential costs. This is what's going to be left, and this is what our proposals are for farmers' price. And the president signed the decree. That's the intervention of the government. Now that is gone. The second issue is that the government had foreseen that our production was dropping, and they put in quite a bundle, milliards, to resuscitate the sector between 2010 and 2020. That was a cocoa coffee rehabilitation scheme. 600,000 tons of cocoa by 2020 and 325,000 tons of coffee. When I came back from Ghana to review that document here in 2020, in this very space, we were...
The Monfevre Hotel.
Yes, we were close to 300,000 tons. Imagine, do the math, if we had hit 600,000 tons of cocoa and getting 6,000 francs a kilo, who will be talking about debt? There'll be an explosion you see.
Of wealth.
Of wealth, So within that, I think what we need to caution our farmers is that with that wealth, it's not, don't do like they do in Ghana where they take a second and third and fourth wife. No. Let's look at living standards, housing conditions, health issues, investing that money in geospacing, locating their farms, paying experts to come and look at their farms and recommend government approved.
Sending children to school to become experts.
Exactly.
And learn more of the mechanized part of it.
Right. So we have done well in trading, but we're losing to Nigeria, smuggling. We're losing. So we need to really put it in the proper context. As
the board chair of the Cameroon Development Corporation, this is one of the companies hard hit by the socio-political crisis in the Northwest and Southwest. I don't know what the situation is today, but from time to time, we hear strike action here, financial instability in the structure, as gradually the crisis is reducing. What is the state of CDC today, if you may have a comment to make?
Yeah, it's still very delicate. But fortunately, the government has accepted to maintain CDC on its portfolio. That's good news. The second thing is that government has put in the mechanisms to take over the debts in terms of arrears and benefits and all that into the national debt basket. And we're about to wrap up the financing of that debt. We'll be able to pay arrears. There's some strike action actually going on now. And that's the message that we have gotten that clearance. Even the head of state has given, the prime minister has recommended, and we've gotten that okay. And I think that in a country where everything is a priority, to get government to prioritize us among the priority is really, we are hoping that by end of the month or mid-December, we'll be able to put smiles on the faces of our people.
Go ahead, maybe you wanted to say something.
There's one other really fundamental issue that I wanted to mention. Yeah. Also in the same framework of my hats off, to government, is the creation of the new SNI. Because I've worked in a lot of countries where sovereign wealth development is a very key issue.
The National Investment Fund.
Yes.
So the decision which was taken by the president to restructure it is absolutely okay.
Oh yeah, for me, it's okay. I just hope that we'll get somebody robust and active, to run it, because if we look at the mining sector, which is coming into bloom right now. When you give somebody a mining contract, right, the government gets a royalty, okay? A lot of money, millions of dollars. But the person who comes out of a mining deal smiling is the person who finances, the deal. So if we could build our sovereign wealth to the point where we can participate in the financing of such deals, we don't only get royalty, but we get the finance returns. And that's how Saudi Arabia, countries in Europe have built sovereign funds that they can participate. And, so it's not only royalty, but icing on the cake, So I hope, and if you look at the decree on SNI, it gives that latitude. It also closes two structures, rehabilitation and one other structure that, for me, were just heavy in the value chain. So I think putting that into place will bring the country, major steps forward.
And with that, we conclude the interview. The board chair of the Cameroon Development Corporation and an expert on climate change and advisor, former Chief Executive Officer of the Well Alliance for Cocoa Producers, Hope Sona Ebai. Thank you very much indeed for being guest on my program.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.